Permíteme un momentito, por favor. Sorry. Thank you very much for those of you that decided to stay. No, okay, so I know that then we're going to go to lunch at what? Yeah, about noon, yes. So I will try to go a little bit faster on this presentation, promise. One of the things that then we were talking before, right, was about developing a program within the organization in order to be able to do digital investigations. Right? Do you need one? And I think that then we go back to the same issue that we had before. Why are we doing digital investigations? Where do we do them? Are we doing them? If you're an organization that you're attempting to do, or that you're in charge of the infrastructure, right? Then yes, you have to some extent, you had to do some investigations, right? Oops, sorry. Sorry, one of those things that they keep calling an alarm. Anyway, technology is tracking me down. I think that then the issue is, how are you responding to your own incidents? Do you have an incident response? And also, how do you define, even much more, once that you have one, how do you define metrics? How do you define some way of measuring that if you're doing better or not, if you are not conducting any one of those investigations, right? We may rely on technology, but we don't do anything more. So to some extent, all the organizations, if they're not doing it, they probably need to start doing some form of investigation about some of the incidents that they're happening to their systems, on their information systems. The other one is that, unfortunately, all of those issues are information theft and inappropriate use of confidential information and issues on the workplace. They're not disappearing. They're increasing. The use of technology, the use of smaller devices, and many other things are becoming much more frequent within the organizations. And how are you going to be dealing with those issues, some personal issues, or disclosure of information on your organization? Also, if you're not monitoring, how do you know that it's not happening? That's one of the other problems. You may say, no, we don't have any problems. And the question is, well, agree. You may not know that then you have a problem, but are you monitoring your network? Are you monitoring your users? Are you monitoring the activities on your network, right? What are you using as a basis to say that then you don't have any one of those activities taking place within your organization? And the only way that then you can answer that if you are proactive in looking at information and trying to understand what's happened within your organization. The other part is that, whether you like it or not, all the organizations at one point are going to be faced with a legal request for information. And it's coming. It's not that it's going to take longer. It's not that you're not, or the organization doesn't have any legal issues. All organizations at some point are going to be confronted with some form of a legal issue, and then you're going to be required to reproduce, to provide, or to do something with digital information, and are you prepared to deal with that? All right? So to some extent, I'm not saying that then you need to have the full capabilities, but then you need to have some form of responding to some of the issues that they may be presented to you, that they're associated with many of the incidents that it can happen with your organization. So digital investigations are an integral part of your incident response program. Now, how many of you have an incident response in your organization? That means, do you already have that capability? Are you already responding to incidents? And how are you responding to those incidents is important. One of the important issues of that is that one of the things that we're talking initially is that the evidence collection and preservation must be determined early on during an incident response. It's not something that then you can wait. It's not something that the first responder go out and they try to do something, and then it's later on that then you decide that, oops, that is something that then we should have stopped by and then collect the information, because then we need to do a full digital investigation or a forensic investigation of that system. You can do that. You need to, from the onset of an incident or a security incident, try to identify what kind of incident is, and based on that, make a decision on how you're going to react and what you're going to collect, what you're going to do next. So if you fail to do that, you are really putting your organization at risk. You're losing a lot, right? So how do you get ready for digital forensics? Well, the most important thing is, do you know what your valuable information assets are? That means at the end, that's what you need to protect, right? I mean, this one is not necessarily talking about an employee or something like that, but if you are in one of those industries, if you have intellectual property, if you have any one of those things, do you know where they are? Do you know what are your resources? In the case of a university, our resources is all the information that then we have about our students. That's probably the most valuable information, right? And it has a lot of restrictions, a lot of issues associated with their protection that we need to comply with. So the potentials for liability if we fail to protect personal identifiable information can be tremendous for the university. The same happened with our health sector. Our health center has information that is also protected. So universities, what we have is information. Information is our asset, and how do we protect it? We also have other type of information, and that one is intellectual property. How do we protect intellectual property? The property of our faculty, whether they're teaching courses, whether new course development, all of that is intellectual property. As a faculty member, I'm also faculty. As a faculty, we never like to think about it. We believe about the free exchange of information, but there is some areas within some of the disciplines where people are really concerned about the protection of some of the intellectual property, just because of the nature of the type of the research that they do. People that are doing research under grants, they need to, they really need to protect that intellectual property, right? So, do we know where that information is? And if we can classify it and we can take a look at it, that's the place where we start looking then at how is that information flowing within the organization. So what we need to do is we need to protect the flow of all that information. Wherever it comes, wherever it goes, wherever it stays, whether it is stored, whether it is manipulated access, all of those places are places that we need to look very carefully in order to protect it. And those ones are the places where we need to be able to respond to an incident. If there is an incident in some of those areas, right? Because that's where the valuables are, that's really where we really need to focus our attention in order to do a digital investigation or collect additional information. You may not want to collect information everywhere, but if you can identify those areas that are critical, those ones are the areas where you may want it to do much more extensive collection. Plan and develop on a strategy. Many organizations don't think about it, but everything is planning, but everything has to do with defining your areas of risk. In the case of or systems, right? The areas of higher risk is where individuals have access or individuals are using social security numbers or personal identifiable information. And other areas of risk, high risk, are the areas where individuals are handling credit card transactions or payment or money, right? Those ones are usually the two more sensitive. And of course, the other one is when we handle medical record information for our students. Those ones are the areas where we are really sensitive to any type of incidents that originate from those areas. Any reports that it comes out of those areas, then automatically subject to more scrutiny and an investigation. Why? Because the potentials for liability. So every organization needs to do a plan or needs to identify those areas and then make a plan. How do you plan to react? How you're going to define the criteria for your digital investigations and what is going to be the scope of those investigations. So As I said before, do you want to do a digital investigation every time that a computer gets infected by a virus? Well, no. But in some cases, depends on the area, depends on the circumstances, and depends on some of the behavior, you really want to do an investigation. Depends also on the way that the virus is classified, right? In that case, that triggers, and that one is one of the triggers, and does define some criteria. The other one is, have you prepared your infrastructure to collect all the necessary information that it will assist you in do that investigation of that system when it occurs? So rather than start thinking about where are my sources of information to begin with when the incident's happening, you already know where are the sources. You're already collecting that information. You're already ready to take that information and start conducting the analysis, right? Because you already planned for it. Now, are there going to be things that then you never planned for? Yes. There is always those exceptions that are going to move away. But nonetheless, I mean, those ones are going to be far few and between, right? But if you're planning, at least on the majority of your cases, you already put measures in there for the protection of that information, and that will minimize your risk. But it also increases your possibilities to mitigate those risks really fast and being able to respond much faster than in any other way. So what we were commenting before is, do you have an incident response team? How do you get an incident notification and alerts? Do you know how many do you get every day? Do you process them? Is someone looking at them? Are you collecting the right information from workstations and servers? Are you collecting the right information from log files, network traffic, backup files, right? That one is basically the first stage that you start looking at. What I'm collecting is the information that I need in order to support my investigation. Once then you start putting your mind, I mean, and that framework of what is what you need, what is what you're going to do, what is the scope, what are the areas, and what is the information that then you're looking for, that allows you then to go back into your infrastructure and start tuning up your infrastructure precisely to collect that information out of those areas. The other one is that once then you identify that, the next step is to develop and implement best practices for evidence handling and integrate on your incident response program. As I mentioned before, the first person that is going to get into a system, into an incident, may not be you, may not be the person that is going to be handling the investigation or the people that they do the investigations, but it may be the technician. He's going to be probably the first responder. So you need to develop some steps and develop some practices and put it in place for those individuals so that when there is an incident in those areas, those individuals already know what to do. They already have a table, they have a chart, they know step by step what they need to do, how they need to collect it, etc. That means all of that one is prepared ahead of time and is ready to go. And of course, you practice. Right? It's interesting what happens if you stop practicing. For those of you that may not be familiar with incident response, I'm not just going to tell you a little bit about it. What is an incident response process? And usually what happens is that it starts with an incident detection. Of course, you need to have a way to detect something, right, to alert you. Otherwise, you will never see an incident. Some people say, oh, we don't have incidents. Good. Do you have something to report to you that you have incidents? And they say, oh, no, we don't need that. We don't have incidents. Okay, so good for you, right? That's so reassuring. One of the first steps that happen when you have a security incident is containment. Sorry, the containment. Depends on the type of incident, of course. In some cases, you may have a computer that is attacking many other ones. So what do you want to do? You want to contain that. You want to prevent that one from happening. You have a computer that is doing something inappropriate. It's sharing content that it shouldn't be on the network, or many other type of things, right? So the first thing is containment. Of course, one of the things that then you happen is that is isolation, and that's when you start first, is when you encounter the first step on the collection and preservation of evidence. During the process of containment, you want to make sure that then you don't destroy the evidence, that you do not modify it, or that you don't do anything to it, right? That it will render inadmissible or something like that if you decided to go later on to court. In many organizations, when you have incidents on large systems, the first thing that then you want to do is to assessing the impact. If you are talking about an incident on your learning management system, like Moodle, during the week of finals, are you going to shut it down? There is always a balance that then you have to do, right? It's a balancing act between the accessibility of the resource, the secondary systems, and the impact to the end users. So before you do anything else, right, and usually these two steps are usually played together, is what do you do to isolate without impacting the users? And at the same time, how do you make it in such a way that you preserve some of the information that then you need to as an evidence? So that is not easy, not when you're dealing with critical systems on your infrastructure. What happens if it's your telephone system? Can you shut down telephones for your organization? No. Do you have a way to mitigate that? Do you bring another one? Do you isolate it? I mean, there's other mechanisms that you need to look for in order to mitigate that risk, in order to isolate the system and still leave the functionality until you have time to find a different alternative, right? And at the same moment, at the same time, try to prevent that one from propagating anywhere else. So, and there's also, what happened is a digital investigation, to do or not to do. I think that is the question. At some point, someone has to make the decision that, is this a case that is going to be escalated to do a full digital investigation or not? If it is, okay, then there's a path that then you follow. And in some cases, you don't have any other choice, but you need to do it. Why? Because then you need to comply with some legal responsibilities, right? Some of those ones are very popular now is the incident notification laws, that if you have systems that contain personal identifiable information and that they get breached, you had to notify if the information of those individuals was accessed without authorization, right? So in those cases, you had to do it. And of course, one of the other things that happen as part of your incident response is damage control. And that's why you need public relations and legal counsel and all of that. Legal counsel plays an important role in your incident response, in particular once that then you come to this stage that is complying with legal responsibilities, right? That's when, as part of your incident response team, you have people that is coming from all different areas of the universities, and legal counsel is one of them. You don't do anything without the approval of legal counsel, and no one sends anything without the approval of public affairs, so public relations. You have to minimize all of those impacts, right? You have to control that. And that's what you require, that requires a team. So depending on the type of incident that then you're dealing, probably sometimes it escalates there, sometimes it doesn't escalate that far. But when it does, you better have everyone coordinated so that no one makes any statements, right, without being approved by everybody else. I don't do public statements on those incidents. Everything it goes through a particular channel. So we handle part of the investigation, and then we handle that, and all the communications, all publications, new releases, all of that one is handled by another part of the incident response team, and they take care of that. So in general, that gives you an idea of the main components of your incident response team or your incident response capabilities. Incident detection. So if you don't have one, I hope that then you do, but if you do have one, then how do you get responses? I mean, how do you detect incidents? Incident detections, right? Can you take it in two different sets? One is external incident reports. Do you know what copyright violations are? In universities, we're very popular with them. So, right? So if you don't know what it is, those ones are violation of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Those ones are people that are using peer-to-peer software, right? And that once in a while we get notifications that an individual is sharing content that is copyrighted and is sharing it without the authorization of the author. So how do you deal with those cases? Universities have already mechanisms, and then we have an incident response. We have a complete process around it for students that are on the dorms and for students that they get into our organization. And in case that then we get one of those notifications, most organizations do, then you have a way to react to that. We also get notifications that our campus has become a spamming campus. Well, it's not unusual. When you are hosting email for your students, right? If one of their students, their computer becomes compromised, their passwords become compromised, their access to their email system becomes compromised, and then they use our email system in order to send spam. We can send a few thousand emails per second. So very rapidly, we became the top spammer in the region, and then we need to react to that. So then we have already some way to detect to some of those external incident reports. So there is all this machinery and there's all these standards that then people follow or that they use in order to report when something bad is being detected from your campus, right? Or your organization. So you probably have that. There is also the things that then we have that is scanning that it takes place for attacks, virus and worms attacks, that are also originated from our campus. Some organizations, universities in particular, and most people do too, then when they are becoming the center for propagation of viruses or other type of attacks, there is only some organizations that they can notify you. There is a couple areas that their agreements, right? And they notify you in case that then they detect that your campus is sending or scanning or doing scanning in areas that they shouldn't be doing it, so that they send you a notification and then you know that something is wrong with your computer or your campus, and then you can react about it. So that one is the external ones. So for those ones, the campus need, in some cases, to subscribe to some of those resources, but it needs to have the capability to respond to that. And there are typical ways in which people will send you that information. Whether they detect that your website is being compromised or someone detects that you're attacking, all that, they know how to send it. They send it to an alias, and then there is a group of people that receive those emails or receive the notifications, and they react accordingly. Internal incident reports, those ones are for you being proactive in the detection of either malware or other things that may be happening within your organization. So most of you probably within the organization that you work, you have an antivirus. Your antivirus detects all the other things that are coming every day, and it probably has a place to send reports, if it's configured to do so, when your computer is infected and it couldn't be cleaned. Right? So we get those reports. So we proactively have reporting that they send us, so many computers were infected, this is what we find, they couldn't be cleaned, and those alerts are they're basically used in order to determine, is that happening in one of those critical areas? And if happening in those critical areas, then people now know what to do. If it's not, then the individual usually know what to do. In the case of our university, or some of the other ones that I also know, there is a large number of those alerts that are generated for computer labs, student computer labs. Why? Because a student comes with every creature you can imagine in a USB drives, in many things that they connect, so that we get all those reports, right? And it's students that are infected, or computers that we detected that are infected when they connect to our wireless network. So then we also something do, okay? The other one that then you're looking at is the policy violations, and there is a way. That means we look for some possible policy violations, right? But we're very careful not to violate privacy, right? And there are certain norms that then you follow. But then you had to have a way to respond to some of those. And then the other ones that then you discover through analysis. So there are certain things, or your resources are constantly being attacked. I mean, you cannot tell me that or not. They're constantly under attack, right? Websites, every website. People are trying to look for ways to penetrate your website, to compromise your website so that they can compromise your clients, your visitors. That's one way that's happening all the time. So one of the things that then we do is that then we run, or that you need to run, an intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems. Many organizations do. And they try to alert you about all the potential attacks that then you're having. And then you also do a network flow monitor analysis, and you also do syslog analysis, meaning all of those devices that they're telling you that something is happening, someone is hitting your firewalls, they're trying to do things that they shouldn't, and then you try to do all that analysis. That one is a proactive analysis in order to identify things that may be happening, things that they're attacking you, and try to find out those ones that they go by and that they're successful. When you have a large network with a large number of devices, there's always a good probability that someone forgot something and then suddenly they become compromised, right? A technician was working, did some changes, nobody knew about it, or they put a computer that it was in the location of the network that they shouldn't, and then the computer becomes compromised or something like that. In some cases, what happened is people fail to patch their systems in time, then become vulnerable, and then they basically just go under, right? But that's another way that then we also do it. And in addition to do this, and that's something that you can also include it in there, is reports that then you get from your periodic vulnerability scannings. So you can conduct vulnerability scannings on a periodic basis on all the internet exposed services that then you offer on your organization, and try to find out systems that may be vulnerable, and then try to take steps to remediate those ones before they go under attack. So notice that incident detection is fun. Well, it's not fun, but it can keep you busy for hours every day, and it keeps us busy for a couple times, right? So the incident detection requires many things. Some of those one has to do with your technical considerations. In particular is the network design, the intrusion detection hardware and software that then you're using, what kind of network traffic monitors that you use, having to have a syslog infrastructure, and then being able to do analysis and correlations, right? It looks like a lot, but once then you put it in place, right? Then it's just a question of having people that are able to generate reports and then go through the syslogs, and slowly you start improving. It's not something that then you go from 0 to 100%, but it's something that it takes a certain amount of time until your organization matures on the handling and the analysis of all those systems. The incident analysis. So what happened? The digital investigation can provide you when did it happen? What was compromised? To what extent was it compromised? How did it happen? And what else may have been compromised? Something that is interesting is that, in general, not only one resource is the one that is compromised. You find one, and then you just close your eyes and try not to think more, but then you know you're going to find another one, unless you're really lucky and you cut it right in time. But usually one system becomes compromised, and then that system is used to compromise other systems. So if you don't detect it right away, then it just propagates, all right? So it's really important to how fast do you respond and how do you respond to that incident. But it can answer a lot of questions. So if you were not doing anything else, but that means you only wanted to protect your own assets, you were, or if you have an incident response, you were probably doing some digital investigations, probably not formally as a digital investigations, but I can assure you that you were doing, at least you were trying to answer some of those in order to mitigate some of the risk. Whether you did it formally following the forensic process, that's another story, right? Most people go, oh, I find it, the technician goes, looks into, logs in, tries to look at it, what happened, and say, oh yes, it was compromised. It doesn't do any more thinking about it, and then you say, I need to rebuild the system, and there goes all your evidence. So at any given time, there was probably anything about what was the extent of the compromise, what else may have been compromised, or what is the scope of the compromise in that case. what kind of information was on that system, right? So that's what is important to recognize, that you really need to develop some minimum capabilities for incident analysis and incident investigations, right? If nothing else, just to make sure that you can prevent those incidents that are really serious, right, from going undetected or not being taken into consideration. Someone needs to be alerted. The incident handling, right? One of the things that then you want to make sure is how you are going to be managing that evidence. So the evidence handling, right? So once that then you get that, how are you going to be doing it? What are you going to be doing with that? You need to implement, again, that one is part of your incident response. People are going to go get there. So how you're going to be doing the handling of evidence. In any case, I mean, if you identify the sources of evidence, right? Are you going to be collecting it all of those systems, right? And the preservation of systems, the preservation of evidence. Now, there is something that is interesting, that is the evidence collection procedures on how you're going to be doing it. It's a little bit more technical. Are you going to be doing it out of live systems? Doing collection of evidence on live systems is non-trivial, right? Everything is changing, the system is alive, that means it's running, it's a computer that is running. How you're going to do it? There are tools to do it, but you really need to understand what you're doing in those cases, and that one usually happens when you're doing on servers. Things are getting a little bit more complicated. Why? Some of those things that they call virtual servers. So it could simplify your life, or it can make it a nightmare. So how you're going to be doing that? So you really need to develop, if you know that that one is what is happening as part of your incident response, on how you're going to be handling the evidence, you really need to develop good procedures to deal with some of those instances that it may occur, depending on what happened, and depends on the type of devices that people are using. One thing that I have here is mobile devices, right? That one depends on your organization. In some organizations, mobile devices are not allowed to have access to any data that is confidential data, period, right? Why? Because you are putting a lot of risk on that mobility, right? Individuals that they need to have access to confidential data or highly sensitive data, they need to follow different standards. They need to come from different areas of the university. Right?
We have one of the attendees that is registered online that has a question.
Oh, yes.
If you could clarify if there is any mechanism that could help reduce the risk that hackers can steal or affect the integrity of the data.
Oh, yes. Okay, I think that then the question that he has is that what mechanisms can you do in order to prevent a hacker, right, to either modify the integrity of evidence that then you're trying to collect, right? One of the, if you remember, one of the situations that then you have in there, and well, let me just put it this way. It all depends when, at what point do you detect the incident. If you can contain the incident, meaning that then you can prevent the hacker or the intruder to continue to have access to the system, then you may have a chance. The thing that you never know is when individuals may plant a process that then when you try to stop the machine or when you try to do something, there is another process that is triggered, and then that other process is the one that deletes a large amount of the evidence. So it all depends. I mean, it's very difficult. There is always a risk when you have an intruder on your system. If the intruder is there, you really need to be very careful, because then you don't know what tools they may have been installed on your system. And there is always the risk that something can happen and your evidence is gone, right? So, yes, I mean, that you say there is 100%, there is always a method to do it. The answer is no. It all depends. When do you detect the incident? What do you detect on the incident? What evidence do you have initially for that incident or what is taking place? On what system is happening, right? and whether you can isolate and you can do some of the other techniques, right? But it's on a one-by-one cases, and I think that it depends a lot on the ability of the incident response team, right, or the investigator in order to identify that some of those things are happening. Yes.
Again?
Yes.
I just want to know, what did you mention that a virtual server could be an admin?
Oh, virtual servers, as you know, people are going into virtualization. So you can have a cluster of 3, 4, 5 virtual servers, all of them without sharing data. And if one of them compromised, more than one may be compromised. And trying to get that server out of offline, put it online, right? Again, there is advantages and disadvantages. People say, well, if the virtual server is compromised, you just isolate that server and then you bring another one into play. Well, do you know when the compromise happened? It may be that when you bring the next one, right, it's compromised again, right? Because you don't know really when it was compromised and how it was compromised. So without not knowing that, and that usually happens with the other servers, it's just that physical servers give you more time to react. Virtual servers are not. They're created on the fly. So there's a lot of little complications that happen with virtual servers, right? Oh yeah, there is a method to go on, then you start doing the analysis. But again, I mean, remember, virtual servers now, you can create any virtual servers in 2 seconds. And you had to deal with all of the issues associated with them. And although people are confident that if you infect one virtual server, that is very difficult to go to the hypervisor and then do other infections in other systems, there's already a proof of concept that it can happen, right? So you never really know what is the extent of the compromise. And in virtual servers, there's also, remember, they come in through one end, but what other access that virtual server had? And if it had access to databases, it had access to other systems, right? It also may be more than one. Yes.
Hello. From your experience, how do you think honeypots are efficient in preventing hackers from really doing their job?
Well, we are in contact with some organizations that they have honeypots, and they try to alert us when something like that is happening. The problem is the honeypots themselves, and it also require, yes, right, is that I think that they're good, but it requires a lot of maintenance. It requires a lot of attention to your honeypot. You're putting something in there where you're attracting attacks, and then you really need to make sure that you have good trained individuals in an isolated network of your environment, right? Where you can really do the analysis, and then you can really start looking at what is taking place, conduct the analysis. So it requires a lot of resources.
But do you think the main issue with the honeypots are basically maintenance?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, trying to maintain them. That means you need to have dedicated personnel looking at that one all the time, because they're under attack 100% of the time. That's why you put them in there, right? And then you're trying to find what is happening. And that one complements is information that then you get from your honeypot. We complement information that then you're finding or correlate with information that then you have on your intrusion detection systems. So yes, it allows you to see, it gives you a different view of what is taking place on your network, right? But yes, it requires a lot of effort to keep them running, right? So I hope that answered the question, yes. Oops. So one of the things that then we're looking in the preservation of evidence, right? Again, how do you maintain the chain of custody? And document, 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 all right? Everything is documentation. You need to write everything you do, everything everyone does, from the system administrator, and that one is not an easy task, right? From technicians, try to document everything that they do. that requires training, right? You need to train your system administrators out of those systems in order to be able to recognize where something is not normal, and then start making notes and starting to follow certain procedures as part of their incident response. So, and also making sure that you maintain the integrity of all of that. So as you were saying, okay, I have my virtual machine, right? How I'm going to maintain integrity of that virtual machine? I'm shutting it down. You had to follow certain process in order to isolate it, grab it, right? That virtual machine, for those of you that are not familiar with them, the way that they look like is just a file. It's just a little thing on an envelope, but it's just a bunch of files, right? Occupying a lot of space. So that's not what it is. So, but you need to get it, and then there is other techniques on the virtual machines and some of the virtual managers that people use when you can get snapshots, and then you can do a lot of interesting analysis on the virtual machines themselves even before you shut them down. But it is really fairly new. Not many people are really, at least on your system administrators, people that are maintaining, they're not really that, they have not received that much training on them, right? And that's another area that you really need to take care of them. You need to provide that training for those people. That's what I'm saying, that becomes a nightmare, right? So what is what you need to do? Well, you need a strategy for your digital forensics. As I was saying before, you need to develop and implement policies and procedures. One of the things that is interesting is, and that one is going to also to be coming later as we go into some of the other presentations later in the afternoon, is, do you have uniform retention policies? So it becomes really important about your retention policies, retention of information, right? Who is deleting what, when, where? And you may think that then you have data on the network that you're preserving for 3 weeks, but you're not, right? However, your email, you're preserving it for 10 years, right? So what is the data that then you're retaining, and what are you retaining, and are you coordinating that so that when you're trying to do a forensic analysis or you try to do any investigation, that then you know that the data that then you're looking is there. The worst that it can happen, well, something that it can happen is that one data is maintained for a certain amount of time, another one is not maintained for a certain amount of time, and then suddenly you lose a tremendous amount of evidence and you can no longer correlate. Equipment and tools is another part that is important, right? If you want to develop your digital forensics capabilities, you really need to start thinking about what equipment are you going to have and what tools are you going to plan to use in order to conduct investigations. And some of the ones I would say they're commercial, and other ones are open source, but you require training and you're required to provide that one for the people. And that one is personnel and training. You need to maintain that individual trained and up to date on whatever new techniques there are, because things are changing constantly, right? Can it be done? Yes, it can be done, right? So your resources, you're going to be required, we're talking about equipment, so what you're going to be required, you're going to have dedicated hardware and software. Forensic workstations are not cheap. So, and then you also need, we will go in a minute, but forensic software is also not cheap if you want to go with the commercial software. Some of you already have mentioned some of that it takes some resources in order to get it running. One of the things is that your forensic hardware has to be keeping up with the technology. Now, a couple of years ago, 250 gig drives were not really that common. Well, they were common, right? Well, they were state-of-the-art a couple of years ago. Now you can find them. Now, the minimum drive that then you get is what? 500 of a terabyte. Now, what kind of systems do you have on your organization? If before you were able to do an analysis in a 250 gig, right? You have storage in order to handle that. That was fine. Now suddenly you have to be dealing with terabytes drives. Do you have the storage to accommodate those images? Do you have the storage to be able to analyze that amount of data, right, on your systems? So your equipment, whatever you do for forensic workstations, your forensic hardware, needs to be upgraded periodically. So it's not something that then you buy and then you forget about it. It's something that then you need to keep it up. You need to continually update because the technology keeps changing. That means 3 years ago, you didn't have, I would say, iPhones. Now you do. If that one is part of the scope that you define for your organization to conduct digital investigations, then you will need to buy all the hardware that is necessary in order to be able to extract evidence out of those devices, correct? So those processes, that means that thing that you need to keep updating all the time is an investment. And the investment in people, that is continuous training, on the job, courses, certifications, and they keep increasing. So all the time, that's an investment, right? You need to keep personnel trained. And remember, it's not only that, it's also your first responder. So where are you going to be putting your money if money is tight? The workspace. One of the other issues that then you have to deal with is where are you going to preserve your evidence? If you have to preserve digital evidence for 7 years after something happened, where are you going to put it? Now, if it's one hard drive, okay, you find a refrigerator and stick it in an envelope, put it in there, right? With an environment. You need to have a proper environment to store certain media. If it happened that then you store in magnetic tape media, magnetic tape doesn't like many environments. So if that your evidence is bad. So one of the issues that people are having now is that how do you store terabytes of data? Outsources. So there is all of those things, and then once they're an outsourcer, remember, the preservation is also that you need to maintain integrity. So part of the process is to ensure that whatever you do with that data, you maintain what? The integrity of that data, right? And so it becomes a kind of snowball effect. So that's what I was saying. That means that then you need secure facilities for preservation of evidence, right? And then you hope that they will last. As I was joking before, if you had saved some of that information in floppies, do you have a floppy drive now? No. So you had to make sure that whatever evidence you're using to store it, that you would be able to read it in 3, 4, 5 years from the time that then you need it, right? If there is a case to do so. So that upgrade is also one of the issues for the preservation of evidence. Is one, as I mentioned, I will mention it again, is one of those challenges. How do you keep it up, right? For cases that they take a long time, how do you manage those? Some of you that are probably in law enforcement are dealing with some of those issues. We at the universities may not be necessarily dealing with those, but in general, most of the, I think one of the longest time that they will need to preserve something is about 7 years. So yes, we have to be dealing with some of those issues. It's 7 years. 7 years doesn't look like much, but in terms of technology, 7 years is a lot, all right? So that's something that you need to think about it. The dedicated personnel, trained personnel, do you have it in-house or you outsource? That's one of the questions that is always come to your mind. I mean, at what point, what is the type of personnel that then you're willing to outsource, and what is the type of personnel that then you're willing to train within your organization, right? And one of the other ones is secure legal counsel services, right? One of the issues that then you have when you're dealing with investigations, and right at any given time, is legal counsel. You need to get in touch with legal counsel. You either have it as a retainer, you have it in another way. Some organizations, they have legal counsel all the time, some don't, but you really need to do that because depends on the incident that then you're dealing, right? If you're dealing with an investigation on HR, human resources area, or personnel, or any one of those, you really need to make sure that then you don't violate anybody else's right when you're doing an investigation. The estimated cost for a forensics lab can be very high. Once that then you take a look at all the equipment, the facilities, the personnel, and all of that. So it's going to be easy, $200,000 or something like that, plus a certain amount of money that then you need. Now, it depends also how many incidents that then you're dealing with. If you're doing one incident, or you're dealing with that type of incidents, one every 3 or 4 years, one every 3 months or something like that, you may secure the services or outsource it, right? Everything is what? A return on investment analysis, right? One thing is your liability, one is that this is the risk that then you're running, but the other one is to know your organization. The thing that then you really need to be aware of is that whether you do it internally or externally, you really need to be prepared to provide the evidence. Your infrastructure, your systems, and that one is the most critical part. So there has to be some, right, things that then you can do internally. But there are certain things that you cannot outsource somebody else. Well, you can do somebody else to have your data, if that's what you want, right? And then some organizations are doing some of that aspect. Some of the people that are considering outsourcing some of their systems, one of the reasons why they're considering outsourcing some of their applications is because as part of the outsource, they're also outsourcing for that organization to maintain all the logs, to maintain all the activity logs, to maintain all of those things that is now become the responsibility in case that there is a need for an investigation. So you don't have to deal with that. You can still have access to the analysis. So back and forth, I mean, all of those ones are issues that need to be on the table and that you really need to consider when you do a return on investment. How much is it going to cost you? How often do you need it, right? Is it worth doing it? And again, if nothing else, I mean, at the minimum, and you cannot escape that, your technical staff will need to have, or your own staff will need to be trained up to a certain point. How far do you want to go in that scale for training and providing that training on your infrastructure, right? And that's also that is important. Any questions so far? No? We're moving fast. Okay. Then that's the last one. So, any questions on that? So, but let me, how many of you are familiar with doing return on investment for information systems? And it's not only, that means it's the return on investment, there is all kinds of things that they come into play in those analyses, and one of those ones is risk. And different organizations have different appetite and different tolerances for risk. And that is basically what determines whether you go one direction or the other. Right? Questions? Yes?
You were with the university,
I'm an outsource. That's all right. I'm from another university. I come here. Sagrado has been very good to me, and they invite me once in a while, and I was honored to come and do this presentation for Sagrado. I'm an information security officer at California State University in San Bernardino. So I'm coming from California. Yes. So, yes. All right.
My interest is that there was a situation, of course I can't go into details about it, but it happened in the area in which Hewlett Packard was really taking care of all of this. And they had a huge warning situation that took place
Mm-hmm.
in Congress.
Yes.
It could be stopped.
Yes. Some of the issues that happen, and I think that people are starting to realize is, okay, you outsource. One of the things that then you need to take in consideration, what is the security of the entity where you're outsourcing your resources? Do they have an intrusion detection system? Do they have the monitoring? Do they have the login? Do they have all of those things and all of those capabilities that then you will expect them to have? And can they be audited? Will they allow you for you to go back and take a look at that audit? And there's several things that people do in terms of audits when you sign those agreements, right? But I think that this is one of the areas that we just started to realize is what we should be expecting out of those outsourced services when it comes to security, when it comes to incident response, when it comes to digital investigation support, when it comes to really make me comfortable feeling that I'm going to be notified when there is a security incident, that I'm going to be an active part of that, right? Because you have a system that then you outsource. Let's say that you outsource your email system. We just did that, but you outsource that. If there is a security breach in there, the ones that are being affected are my students, right? From the perspective of an organization, they're your employees. Will you be notified that something happened so that then you can take measures, right? Or your clients. If you are in an organization that you outsource certain services and then your clients are going there and there is a security breach, when your clients are now at risk of being compromised, will you be notified that that happens so that then you can take appropriate steps? Because that will have an impact on you, right? Agree? So all of those ones are things that now people have started to look more seriously, whereas before they were not included on the contract. So now you will see that more and more on the outsourcing, people are including such statements about what are the roles and responsibilities in case of security incidents and how they're going to be handled, right? But yes, that's what happened. Correct. Yes. Oh, someone had, no? Oh, sorry. Okay. Any other question? So notice that incident response, before you go there, I promise it's the last comment. If you start looking really from the organization, whatever organization you are, ask yourself, are you really ready? Is your organization, at what point of readiness is your organization to deal with some of these issues? At what point? What is the elements that then you have installed on your infrastructure? Who's maintaining your infrastructure? What plans do you have? And in some sense, this one brings another idea that there's one of the other things that we also need to consider, that what plans do you have for disaster recovery? That means this one is an incident, and you're getting logs, and then you're getting activities, and then you're getting all of that. But what will happen in case of a disaster? How would you be planning with a disaster? A security incident, as I mentioned before, can be considered a disaster for an organization. And how do you, what steps have you taken to recover from such an incident?
Most people just identify it by having a backup, that's it. Or several firewalls that are
preventing others to get through,
Right.
but they often do, because it has to do with the worm effect, not
Right.
anything else than that. And nothing can save it, seriously.
Yeah, for example, there has been cases in which individuals make a backup, and they're doing backups. Their backup retention is 3 months. Yes, the systems were compromised 8 months ago. What does that mean about your backups? Nothing. I mean, can you talk about the integrity of your backups? No. So that means not being able to detect an incident in time, not being able to recuperate from that. And I know that one will be the worst case scenario, right? But usually what happened, and I don't want to think about it, but usually what happened is when you have an incident, it's the worst case scenario. For some reason, I never get the best case. I always get the worst case scenario, right? It seems that all the stars line up, and then I got the worst case scenario. And that is what is very important for organizations to continually ask themselves, where are we in terms of readiness about our information systems, about the security, about the integrity of our data? What are we doing to validate the integrity of all our data?
I just have a comment in that I see this a little utopian
Yes.
because in my years of experience, most of the organization doesn't have half the money they need to do half what they have to do in order to maintain the data secure.
Yes.
So basically, most of the time, what we're doing is reacting
Mhm.
when the problem arises.
Yes.
And that's a reality.
Yes. Yeah, it takes time. That means for organizations is, some organizations, they take one little step at a time. So the way to do it is, or at least the way that they were doing in their organization, is implementing slowly some capabilities at a time. What we find out that is the most valuable investment has been on training and awareness for our staff and personnel. Yes, technology can solve some of the problems, but you can prevent a tremendous amount of issues before escalating, right? By providing good training and awareness to all your technical staff, making sure that they understand where we should be going, making a plan that is not going to be a short term. It takes a long term to develop some of these capabilities and develop the maturity to be able to react. But yes, I agree. That means the budgets keep being reduced. But again, that means you start with where are your most valuable assets, what is what you can do with that, and then that's what you focus your attention. And prevention is good. Planning and prevention, if you can do it, it can go a long way. But it takes a tremendous amount of effort and commitment from the organizations to do that. But I agree, yes. It's kind of an utopian, but I'm in security, right? So, yes, that's the gospel, right? So, I had to promote that. Yes. Yes. Other questions?
Estamos listos entonces para
Yes.
hacer el receso del mediodía
Yeah,
y
yes.
retornar a la 1 para continuar con la sesión de por la tarde. Muchas gracias a todos y espero volverlos a saludar a partir de la 1 aquí en el salón.
Gracias. Thank you very much.